All right, EA Ermor, turn 91. Let's see how painful staying put is going to be. Probably pretty painful, I'm guessing. Oh, yeah. We do get a throne claim in here, though, so that's very nice. And that is actually our god claiming the throne for himself. No profit there. And then Niflheim claims another throne. So possibly this game is over? No, not yet. Okay, well, let's take a look at what we've got going on here. Yeah, most of this we've talked about. A Banelord, right? We're trying to get some more of those guys up for like some anti-super combatant, and honestly, even just to kill the Niflheim Sacreds, their Nifl Giants. Russ, of course. I was wondering where this Seducer went, and this looks like it's near their capital. Yeah, we do have a bunch of bodyguards. Flame Spirits are pretty tough to assassinate. Ooh, Frozen Heart. Well, there you go. Let's see if this is one of the guys that we gave gear to. I feel like maybe not, but they are weak to cold, the Flame Spirits, that is. And Frozen Heart does a lot of damage. Yeah, you can see. So we even had, plus 15 cold resistance, but, that only translates to 5 after it cancels out his weakness to cold. And yeah, that's an extremely painful loss. And, one of the downsides of sitting still, I mean, we still would have lost, that commander anyway, even if we'd attempted to move. I think I'll have to double. Yeah, movement might actually happen before assassination. I'm not 100% sure. And then we have Niflheim attacking Kalem. Right. So this is probably the final throne, and we've talked about this throne. I don't know. Like what could we have done? Could we have sent something over here? Probably not. We should have gone for the other throne that Niflheim put a fort on top of near Ubar. This is not like a crazy big force. I imagine all of these ladies, are going to have like at least Astral 3, right? So they can all teleport. So, he's teleported a ton of commanders in. This is really expensive. Not much in the way of chaff here. This is probably a remote attack spell at the same time, I'm guessing, right? Which also happens in the magic phase. So that's a good way to provide some chaff. For your casters that you're teleporting in. And yeah, of course, we know about the bugs. Also an excellent way to make chaff. This isn't really necessary. I'm kind of surprised that, this triggered this much gem usage, but I do think it, looks at how much HP you have on the field and was like, this isn't like, that many units here for the number of mages. So we went ahead and just pinged Russ because I was kind of curious to see like what, if anything, that he would patrol with. Like, yeah, just some garbage, like doing really good. Not quite just some garbage. Right, so yeah, of course, he's got the Wind of Death caster in here. So very nice, right? Like this is a risk, but he's got the Ring of Returning on, right? So if he takes damage, he's probably has decent protection, right? And he's surrounded by a bunch of other garbage, also undead garbage, right? So it's going to be very difficult to do something like Ravenous Swarm. So doing a really good job of bringing garbage, but not only just garbage, the, correct type of garbage, along with like a really nasty, wipe spell with like full penetration gear. So we're going to have to walk into that, although I think at this point it might not matter because I think Niflheim's going to be able to get the win, and then who knows what the computer is doing. This is not a province that we have well defended, so good work, computer. And then we get raided here by Niflheim, or actually this might be the Jarls. Like this is actually a significant force moving out. We, in theory, might have redirected our army to try to deal with these guys because we don't have a ton in the fort that they're headed towards. That Centurion is not going to come away with that in case there's any confusion, which I doubt at this point. And then this is our other ping, right, to see if Niflheim, no, they chose not to patrol with anything. So sitting still, probably not the right move. I don't know. I mean, there's definitely good reasons. It's always easy to look back after the fact, and be like, okay, well, I should have done the other thing. And then, we get raided. Let's see if we have, no, we don't really have anything. This is probably near that fort that Niflheim put up. I think this fellow had raided us a few times in the area. In fact, he probably was the one who got the fort, or got the province, so that he could put a fort into it. And this is kind of like Abyssia's old lands, and we never really, we don't have great control over that. We're getting raided quite a bit. This is over more in Niflheim's lands, so it looks like he split out a Jarl, and so this is also the problem, right, where it's we raided really well, but we didn't really have a lot of answers in terms of destroying Niflheim's raiders, right, whereas Niflheim can relatively easily destroy our raiders. Niflheim doing a really good job of raiding out here with a bunch of stuff. This is maybe somebody that we could like jump on top of with like some Soul Slay, and perhaps we had a Soul Slay Golem. I don't know though. Yeah, magic resistance 23, amulet of anti-magic, very nice. Like, yeah, you know, and he's got some gems and stuff. Probably gonna, well, no, it actually kind of looks like he's gonna thug himself. Not that it's gonna matter against this level of PD. So that I think was here. Yeah, so we're losing a lot of provinces this turn, and then of course like Russ is hitting us as well. We are hitting back in a few places. Let's see, I don't think we've seen this cave yet. This is on top of our fort, I believe, and we are not patrolling on. That's sad. I thought we were going to get one more turn. No, this can't be on top of our fort because we do not get pale ones as our fort PD. Oh, interesting. Okay, this guy's got the Crown of the Fire King. I was wondering, like, why is there a how's a Nifl Jarl, like, you know, bringing in some fire elementals? So, like, yeah, Niflheim is in a pretty commanding position, absolutely. And I think, you know, we knew that it was a good chance that our gains were short-lived. Although I wasn't expecting to get rolled back. I mean, I guess I was expecting to not do as well. But then once we started doing well, I thought, okay, maybe. And then, yeah, here we are doing some swarm raiding. But, yeah, we're getting rolled back pretty quickly now. So it looks like, you know, Niflheim was either busy with other stuff or kind of just wanted to see, you know, what we were using for our raiders, right, before really responding. But, yeah, swarm, Bone Tribe is a little scary, but I think the swarm raid will get it against 1 PD. So let's take a look. Yeah, that works out for us, although I think that fellow's out of gems now. Yeah, and, of course, now we're getting raided by Russ's raiders. So yeah, this is the danger. Although in some ways, we'll have to see exactly where these raiders went, because we probably will go after Russ, just for old time's sake. We'll see what we can like teleport, but I don't think it really matters, because Niflheim will absolutely magic phase a fort on top of that throne. And like, you know, we won't really we can magic phase respond and drop some guys on top of it, a couple old dudes in robes, which we might do just for laughs. But like, you know, they're not going to be able to break down the fort, and then of course Niflheim will be able to claim even if we could break down the fort. So I think that was here. Yeah, and that's just a little bit of air elemental rating. That guy probably also had some gear. It's interesting, like I wonder if he cloud trapezed out. Maybe he may have some gem reloads out there. And then here's one of these specters. Okay, this guy's not as kitted. He's been given a skull staff as well as some water gems. So it looks like a mixture maybe, because quickness seems like maybe he's gonna thug. But oh yeah, okay, no, we left a bunch of stuff here. We left a bunch of stuff here. Okay. I don't think this is gonna go well for us. I don't know. You know, this guy, he doesn't have any armor, and, you know, he doesn't actually have earth, right, this particular specter. But then again, none of this stuff that we have has cold resistance, and that is going to be a massive problem. But if our Equite get there first, before the barbarians get the first, or just the barbarians do the trick. So that works out for us quite well, although, you know, we did leave a lot of stuff here and invest very heavily in this province defense, but I really, really didn't want his raiders to get loose into our lands. Like, it's all... Okay, it's not well and good. It's bad that Russ is raiding back his own territory, but definitely we want to keep him out of our territory. Although, like I said, Niflheim's position is kind of undercutting all of this, at least the importance of it. And then we are raiding the computer somewhere. I think we have one of our raiding groups in position, and these guys, of course, are not really going to be able to deal with the Jarls or really Niflheim's Sacreds either. And like, man, there's actually a decent amount of Jade Maiden province defense here, so that's kind of scary. Like, yeah, they're a little fast. Bodyguards are essential. We get a little bit of body ethereal. I went really heavy on the number of bodyguards here, so you can see that, you know, the body ethereal isn't as effective, or at least you don't get as much coverage, so you're more likely to get losses in terms of bodyguards, but probably less likely to get losses in terms of mages. So still playing around like with the exact commitment level that I want to go with, but you know, that's pretty heavy commitment there, but works out against relatively light PD, but a decent PD type at least. This is probably a swarm raid. Maybe, I think no, another augur raid. Okay, with, yeah, not as hefty in terms of the bodyguards, but they are just up against one province defense. So as long as they don't kill themselves, I need to watch this win. It's been a bit of a rough turn here, so bear with me. Although I will say this fire elemental is taking its sweet time. It is, of course, like cold 3 almost everywhere. Like, yeah, and a fire communion, right, can be dangerous, especially to mundane troops. So that works out for us at least, so that's good. And then, yeah, here we go. We have a raid against Russ, so it's not all bad news. You know, of course, assuming that we win. You can see that, like, okay, another augur communion. I didn't realize we had one in Russ's territory. I thought they'd all... Yeah, just 1 PD. All right, we don't need to watch this one. Watch, this will be the one that gets wiped out. Nope, it worked out. So I should have had faith in our augurs. They only rarely kill themselves. And then let's see, we are taking a province from Niflheim. Let's see, okay, this is real bare bones. Almost no bodyguards here, but also almost no province defense. So I have faith in our augurs now, and they do not betray it, so that's good. We'll definitely have to take a look at the province graph when the dust settles, because I can't, like, are we winning? Are we losing? Little from column A, little from column B. Here's a Jarl, speaking of losing. Yeah, we really need to get like some of those Bane Lords up, to actually, right? Because it's all well and good that we can raid provinces away, but I think it's really actually more important. Taking provinces is very important, absolutely. Like, that's something that you want to be doing. But I think in a lot of ways it's more important to destroy the raiders, because like otherwise you can just kind of go in circles for a long time, or worse, like if they're raiders, say like Nifl Jarls, can kill your raiders, aka augur communions, right? That's just not going to work out for you well, in the long term. So like, while it's all well and good that we had a lot of augur communions that were able to take a lot of territory and still are able to take a lot of territory, we're going to lose every single bump, and that's not a good place to be. But yeah, we haven't really been in a good place in this game for some time. So yeah, that does not work out for us. No shocker there. And then we have a battle at a fortress. Whoops, bit of a misclick there. I think this is an augur communion again. Yep, but this time they are on assault duty. There's not too much in here, although there is a mage. But yeah, he's twice born. That's kind of cool, but he's muted, and yeah, he's not. We have 1 fire elemental, so really the only danger is that first volley of arrows. Well, I think someone managed to miss himself. So yeah, it looks like his body ethereal got interrupted by that first volley of arrows. And so like, yeah, this is now fairly dangerous, because if the communion collapses, I do think he managed to cast Communion Slave. So that's good at least, but he could absolutely die to any one of these arrows, and there's going to be 1 more volley at least. So here comes Summon Fire Elemental. Oof. And I think it got interrupted. Yeah, it did. So we'll see what the Communion Master chooses to cast in the meantime. Yeah, Conflagration. Not the best choice, and there goes the communion collapsing. Now he does still have a fire gem, so he uses it on a pillar of fire. Not the worst thing to use it on. And there are a few bodyguards here at least, right? And these guys are ethereal. There's another pillar of fire. You're right, because he did manage to make himself fire too. Yeah, so, right, ethereal, 75% of mundane attacks don't do anything. But the other 25%, well, if you're a dude in robes, they're a big problem. So yeah, I don't know what it is about this fort. This is the second time that we've failed at this fort. And I mean, we haven't really been committing that much, but I mean, also it's pretty much empty. So I don't know why this fort is, it's got our number. And then, yeah, of course, everything is cold. So an Illwinter is probably still up, was still up last I checked. I think this will work out for us. Eagles are pretty dangerous. We're definitely going to lose some. These are the great eagles, the remainder great eagles that we were trying to leave on Abyssea's capital to convince Vanheim that like something big was still on top. But then I realized that's silly, so I might as well just try to grab the Eagles while I still can. And it was looking like the Eagles were going to make it, and then Dominions had other ideas, although it does look like it works out for us. Ooh, there's a werewolf in there. So that's kind of good. We keep the province, right? We lose 2 great Eagles. That's not great. Some unexpected events, handful of nature gems. We like that. Misfortune, we don't really care about that. Ooh, that's a real rough one. Yeah, I'm kind of curious if you humor me for a second. Where was this? Yeah, interesting. So there's no drain here, and we do have misfortune obviously, but yeah, I thought most, if not all, of the gem events required some drain scales in the province. And I was gonna say that, right, when you take misfortune but you avoid taking drain, sometimes when you conquer some lands that then have drain in them from other people's scales, it's then your scales mix with those drain scales. So hey, congratulations, it's as if you took misfortune and drain, and you can get gem loss events events, but it looks like, you know, you can get fairly significant gem loss events because 10 is rough with just misfortune, and we're actually only misfortune 2. That might have even been one of our forts. I wasn't really paying attention. Wolves howling at the moon. I'm sure that's fine. Niflheim getting attacked by some independents. This is probably, I think we have a scout here. Yeah, just some villains. There's not a whole lot of province defense, I suspect, like anywhere in the world. Province defense investment is down worldwide. Although then again, villains are pretty awful. Okay, they did win. I was going to say, I mean, there is a giant there. And then we have locked down some fortifications, right? But this is, of course, the fortification of that we failed on in Russ. I think we left like 1 unit there. I'm just going to have to let that one go. We're moving the Eagles over to help, you know, siege the fort that's on top of the throne down near Helheim. Although, again, I don't think any of this is really going to matter. We do at least breach the fortification in Mictlan, so that's nice. We'll probably attempt to storm there next turn. And then, of course, you know, afflictions being cured, and we lose an augur from disease. So yeah, I'll catch you guys after the jump. All right, this is the situation and what we did about it. I'm recording this after the fact, although there aren't really any more spoilers to worry about because Niflheim is on top of this throne and their pretender is here. And so they will be able to get the win next turn because I do expect them to magic phase in a fort. It is important to note that victory occurs as one of the last things on the turn. So in addition to taking the throne, you also need to hold the throne until the end of the turn. So if someone doesn't magic phase a fort in, you definitely have an opportunity to, you know, knock their throne claim off by winning a battle in the location. Of course, we don't really have anything nearby, and like while we do have a few mages that can teleport, we're going to need more than a few mages. There isn't a ton here, but I think we could probably throw our pretender and maybe like 1 or 2 mages. We didn't really have enough teleport gear, I would say. Also, at this point, I was well on my way into my descent into foolishness in terms of playing too many concurrent Dominions games. So in a lot of ways, like I was pretty ready for this game to be over. So we don't respond to this, and Niflheim does indeed win next turn. We'll take a look at the battles maybe afterwards, but now I'll go ahead and flip over to the final turn, and we can kind of go through graphs and just talk review of the game. So indeed, we may rejoice. A true god has ascended and has saved us from the micro of this late game. I am curious to see if they magic phased a fort in. So yes, they did. And Calum actually responded, which, you know, I wasn't expecting. Like I said, you know, I did need this game to end, just from a personal time standpoint. But I was kind of surprised that, you know, Calum had not bothered to fortify a throne location like this late, you know, it's turn 92. I think in a lot of ways the Calum player had checked out like much earlier in this game. But, you know, possibly they're just not aware of all the magic phase options. But as we can see, they did magic phase a fort in. The reason I bring it up, we can see here that, you know, this is a wizard tower, so this is the kind of fortification you get from the earth spell. But previously, where I had thought Niflheim, yeah, the Azure Academy, so they just happened to find a fortification in this location. I thought that this had been magic phased in. So that was definitely a pretty lucky find for Niflheim, but you know, they played a really fantastic game. I think they put together a strong build. I mean, they went underwater. Like, yeah, we can take a look here. So it looks like they'd largely been rolled back in the underwater area. But, I mean, they held 2 underwater thrones. That's pretty impressive. Also because, like, this Therados player, I've tangled with them before. We don't really see eye to eye, as I've mentioned. But they're not a bad player. I also think that Therados isn't necessarily the strongest underwater nation per se, so perhaps a bit easier to take underwater holdings from, you know, Therados, but still, you know, to take 2 underwater thrones to, you know, help close out the game, like that's pretty darn impressive. Obviously, we didn't win. A lot of things went against us this game. There were a lot of dark moments, but really overall, like I am quite happy with how this game went. You know, we made it all the way to the end. We were relevant all the way to the end. You know, we managed to hold the throne and prevent a victory a few turns previously, and I mean, you know, Therados, I think, is probably larger and stronger than us. Xibalba is perhaps not quite as large and as powerful as I thought they were, so we're probably roughly on par with Xibalba. We're larger than Calum. Fomoria, obviously, we're somewhat behind, although they're not actually that big in terms of territory, which is kind of interesting. They have some really large doom stacks. Anyway, all this to say that, we outlasted quite a lot of nations, and surprisingly, our position, towards the end of the game really wasn't that bad, despite doing fairly poorly, I would say, in some of our earlier wars. So let's go ahead and take a look at the graphs. So here's our province graph, and as you can see, for most of the game, we really weren't that big. We definitely had a couple of major dips. We can see I've also put Agartha up here, our first major foe. And even though we didn't lose that many provinces to them, we also didn't really gain that many provinces from them, and we lost a ton of troops. If we go to the army size graph, we can see a couple of major losses here against Agartha, and I think, this really set us back. And frankly is probably where we lost the game. I do think you can absolutely win a game of Dominions having lost a war, but I do think the larger the game is, the less likely it is that you're going to win having lost some wars. I guess we didn't exactly lose the Agarthan War, but, it was a bloody draw. And also, your first war is really important, because you just get more out of your earlier victories, right? You have more forts, more lands, you're drawing income and gems off of that for more turns of the game. That definitely was a war that I think could have won. We're mostly winning, other than the fact that I just didn't have an answer for their super combatant. Tried to lean on mine burn a little too hard, just wasn't quite up to the task. And that is definitely directly a result from me having not played a lot of multiplayer and played a lot more single player. Because you just don't really see, thugs and super combatants, at least not competent ones, from the computer, so it's not really something that you have to worry about too much. The Agartha situation was a major problem. The fact that they lasted so long into the game is pretty painful. Of course, there were reasons for that, right? So in the middle of all this was, TNN. That one was just kind of a weird war. Did manage to get gassed. That was rough, though. Thankfully, it wasn't, our entire army and our equite were able to get back there and prevent it from going on for too long. So we wiped out TNN. That was actually our first capital that we picked up, that wasn't our own. And as you can see, that was about halfway through the game, maybe a little bit more than halfway through the game, and that's pretty late, right? If we look at Niflheim, it really almost perfectly lines up. We were actually doing a little bit better in terms of provinces than Niflheim at first. And then right here when we start losing with Agartha, right, they end up, I think it was against Mictlan. Actually, no, they wiped out Mictlan quite early. You can see Niflheim picks up their first capital right around here, whereas it takes us all the way down here, so significantly longer in the game to pick up our first capital. So maybe this was more recoverable than I thought, because, our gap with the game leader is significant, but not terrible. And of course, then what happens is, as we're trying to finish off Agartha, is Russ, right? So we have a really difficult, really brutal war. Whereas, clearly Niflheim was snacking on some people that they were much more able to handle than we were able to handle Russ. And that definitely put the nails in the coffin, for us actually, winning this game. Ironically, as the game went on, to the late game, we started picking up a lot of gains. And, a lot of this was coming from Niflheim. And this is because they were fighting a lot of different people. But again, these gains that we're getting, we just haven't been able to recruit mages from all this, the whole time. Also, Burden of Time had been running for quite a long time at this point, so the income that we're getting off of these provinces isn't nearly as impressive as it was. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at income. So as you can see, income also a pretty significant gap. I imagine this giant drop is probably when Russ took Gartha's capital from us. Well, maybe not. There might have been other things happening. That is a surprisingly sharp drop. I'm not sure what would have triggered that. We're actually briefly ahead of Niflheim in income, but again, they were trading a lot of territory away, to really focus on the thrones, which absolutely worked out in their favor, right? It was a good move. They won the game. So it's not all about territory. Just for most of the game, it's about territory. Gem income, you can see us more or less mirroring Russ. When we're doing poorly, Russ is doing well. When we're doing well, Russ is doing poorly. And then here are all the survivors, people who are still around at the end of the game, sans Ubar, because, nobody cares about the AI. So yeah, I have to say, actually, Theridos was in a better position than I thought. I mean, I knew they were doing well, but at least in terms of number of provinces, they were significantly over Femoria, who probably was the other person that maybe could have won the game, though I think Femoria's throne position was not great. And then, yeah, here's Kalem. So, as I suspected, I think fairly checked out of this game. And then here is Femoria, who we can see we're actually like neck and neck with them by the end, though. Yeah, in a lot of ways, actually, Femoria more or less tracks our graph. In fact, in a lot of places, we were ahead of them in terms of provinces. It really isn't until later that they really start to take off. Whereas Theridos, had started their climb significantly earlier. And of course, Vanheim definitely was a factor at various points. I'm pretty sure if we put Abyssia up here briefly, yeah, you can see like Abyssia still alive and then all of a sudden disappearing under a wave of elves. But then, in turn, Vanheim, was not able to hold off Femoria. So yeah, if we talk ascension points, right, like no one else was even close to Niflheim. We can see actually a lot of the thrones, well, no, some of the thrones probably came from Theridos. I mean, obviously the underwater ones, but, quite a few of the thrones also came from Russ. So Russ, at a point, was neck and neck. Actually, they were ahead of Niflheim significantly for a little while. Yeah, in fact, like we were significantly ahead of Femoria. I think, yeah, Femoria only had, one or two thrones here? So while Femoria, had some really impressive armies, they just didn't really have the territory and especially didn't have the thrones to back it up. I'll take a quick look at army size. I imagine, yeah, Theridos dominates here. Xibalba as well, a lot of blood summons. And then, like we said, Femoria did have some really large and impressive armies. Ironically, we were next up, but then again, Niflheim being giants, they never have that many numbers. So you really do have to be careful with this army size graph because this only speaks to volume, not to quality. So perhaps not the most useful graph. Much more useful, I think, research. Yeah, and we can see that at least of the people still left alive, Niflheim was the clear research leader. That said, I think, the rest of this grouping here, ourselves, Femoria, and Theridos, we weren't too far behind. I think that even, we being kind of the lowest of tier 1 grouping, if you will, we probably had enough magic to do more or less what we needed to do. That said, we kind of were behind the game leaders in research more or less the whole way. And that kind of brings me in, to the next point, just in terms of thinking about the build. I think for EA Ermor, one of the main changes I would make to the build going forward is investing in Magic 3. And if not Magic 3, although I think probably if you're going to invest in Magic, go all the way. But, when you're tweaking the specifics of a build, you could cut a point or two of Magic and you're going to be fine. Obviously we had no Magic scales and we got enough research. Even having, not a particularly impressive game overall for a lot of it. But being a Fire Nation, being a human nation, being a nation with some really cheap and pretty effective and efficient researchers, Augurs are great, other than the fact that, they die to every wipe spell under the sun. But aside from that, they're extremely useful mages that research well. They're fire mages. You get a good amount of fire income from your capital. You have plenty of fire mages to search out more fire income. That means lightless lanterns. Because they're cheap humans, you can have a lot of them. So all this translates into having, a really impressive, research advantage. And since life gets a lot harder for you in the end game, you do want to get your research, your critical targets in as quickly as possible. This is true of all nations, but I think, particularly for EA Ermor, you're leaning into a strength that you already have and then hopefully avoiding a weakness, completely by just finishing out the game. Now, I don't think you're going to be able to do that in a full house game. I don't know. Maybe somebody can pull off a really impressive throne rush at some point, but I think if you're in an all-player game, you should plan for the late game. But certainly in a more standard game, I think turn 50, turn 60 win for EA Ermor, absolutely possible, and you'll have some really impressive research at that point. So I think Magic 3, it's a really powerful scale, but I think it works really well with EA Ermor. That's definitely a change I would make in the future to this build. Otherwise, like I said, I don't even remember the exact scales. Let's take a look at what we ended with. Yeah, of course, I actually went Heat 3, but Winter being active for so long. Pretty much everywhere is cold. We are headed into winter anyway. But I think the rest of the scales, I'm completely fine with. You can certainly play with exactly how much productivity and exactly how much order you want. I'm not 100% sure this is completely optimal. It also depends on, exactly which units you're recruiting and, how much you're leaning on. Like, we leaned on our sacreds a lot for expansion, which makes our scales kind of less relevant at the start of the game. But if you're doing legionary expansion, you maybe want to go more into productivity. I'm still behind Heat 3, for the movement benefits and like the fact that you're probably going to be seeing Niflheim a fair amount. Like, they're a really powerful nation. They're really cool thematically. I think, people like to play them. So there's a pretty good chance they're going to show up. The Misfortune can be kind of painful. Honestly, I've been running some Misfortune 3 builds lately, and like, I am planning, I think, on switching over and just doing, some luck builds, just purely so I don't have to see barbarians all game long. Don't get me wrong, like, there's a real cost to going Misfortune. All those minus income events in your provinces, I think people, myself included, kind of undervalue how much income you're losing from that over the long run. So it's not a free scale, but for a lot of reasons, like, luck is really inconsistent. Other people's misfortune scales, have a tendency to show up, particularly if you're doing well and you're conquering other people's lands. A lot of people take misfortune, right? And that means, like, despite having spent on luck in those new lands until you get your scales in, you're going to see misfortune events. And then when you combine the fact that you have like really cheap, I guess we don't have any more units left since Niflheim has ascended. But yeah, you have really cheap, recruit anywhere fortune tellers. Like, I would probably go down to Misfortune 3, honestly. I don't know. I'm back and forth. But yeah, I do think Misfortune makes sense on EA Ermor. I would definitely stick with that. So yeah, scales wise, I think this is totally viable, if not perhaps perfectly optimized, with the important caveat of you probably should invest in some magic scales. Troop wise, overall, my opinion hasn't really changed too much. Potentially would want to do like more leve investment in the future. I did really find it difficult to build up numbers of Ostadi. So just to fill out the numbers, recruiting like some leve might be worth it, but these guys really are a pretty significant downgrade. So, it's easy to say that now, but maybe if I took a couple battles with these guys and saw how poorly they did, I might be singing a different tune. Might consider like recruiting a few more lizard auxiliaries in the future. The river crossing, honestly, is pretty darn useful, particularly because you have heat scales. So like, I do think these guys could be kind of useful for like surprise raiding. You of course do not have a swimming commander normally, but maybe throwing them on like an undead commander, perhaps a Bane early on. Could provide you with some interesting raiding opportunities that I didn't really take advantage of in this game. I also think commander and mage-wise, my opinions haven't really changed too much there either. I do think now probably in the late game I would tilt a little more towards getting the Augur Elders, but it is really important that you have at least some Augurs around to try to prevent Magic Duel. Magic Duel really is kind of a big problem for these guys. I will say that, and I kind of knew it at the time, but definitely went overboard twice-borning these fellows. Particularly, I think, do not twice-born any of your high astral mages. So really your astral 2's just not all that high. But those guys are going to become your mind hunters, but you cannot heal undead units with your healers. So if you have a twice-born and it comes back as an undead and then it gets feeble-minded, like, you can't heal him. So I would say probably the majority of your astral randoms, you don't want a twice-born, and it probably just isn't worth the death gems to twice-born your fire randoms. Like, you have so much fire magic, it's fine. I think definitely you want to twice-born the air guys. The air death crosspath is just really useful, so I think probably twice-borning most, if not all of them, would be a good idea. And then twice-borning the death guys kind of probably depends on how much death you have on your pretender. You can always gamble, like these guys that come in at death 3. If they die and they come back and they get an extra point of death, now they're at death 4, which is pretty transformational. That gets you into Liches and Wraith Lords. I'm pretty sure that's what they're called. So that is really nice. But, I think that's probably the other angle. I would attempt to use, I think, more Banes and Bane Lords in the future. I really do think, that was probably the piece that we were missing against Agartha, though certainly we could have also tried to go the route of, Soul Slay. Thaumaturgy 5 is not unattainable for a relatively early war. So yeah, that's kind of some thoughts on the build and, how I might change it in the future. There probably will be, significant other changes. Again, we invested fairly heavily in the Equite. That's kind of another big, question mark. You can also try to invest in your mages. You actually get discounted for shrouds as EA Ermor, and that's the way to make units sacred. So even though you don't have any sacred mages, you do have astral income, right? And you have plenty of ways to search for it. So you'll have astral pearls, definitely. And you have pretty effective mages. So a mage bless, either penetration or range, or maybe even reinvigoration, are all things that you might consider. And I don't think that's crazy in any way, shape, or form. I will say that because I've definitely toyed with a much weaker Equite bless, this is definitely overkill for expansion. Obviously, the resistances are irrelevant in expansion. And of course, I think the attack skill we're getting from a throne. So yeah, you could expand with Equite that have no bless, right? They expand decently well into indies, without any help. You throw them something like Blood Surge, and that's enough. I think where you will run into problems there is early on before you get your research up, right? One of the main powers of Ermor, EA Ermor, is their mage core. But if you don't have any research, they're not going to help you very much. And in the early age, there's definitely plenty of scary powers. We were next to Abyssia. Burning ones are super scary. You don't have any fire resistance. You haven't given your Equite any bless at all. And Abyssia just runs at you. What do you do? Niflheim just runs at you. What do you do? Russ, just runs at you with skin shifters. What do you do? So, I do think there is a fine balance to be walked there. It's while maybe I invested too much in Equite of the Sacred Shroud, that may have also kept me alive early on. So I probably will try to cut down a bit on this bless, I think, for the next run through. We do have to pay for that Magic 3 somehow. But, it's completely possible that you just get killed as a result of that. Also related, to how we're going to pay for those Magic 3 scales is our Pretender was dormant. In a lot of ways, we don't really need our Pretender to come out at turn 12 as a rainbow. I think that's one place that I probably would also change in future playthroughs. We kind of completely ignored our foreign recruit mages, our Flamen. And while don't get me wrong, everything I said about those guys is true, and I hate unforted temples, and they're random. So they're probably you're gonna get a bunch of Fire 2 guys where you're just why am I recruiting these guys? I do think that if you get a lab and a temple up relatively early, with them, they'll get you enough site searching in your other paths to kind of get you by until your rainbow shows up. And then really I probably do too much searching with the rainbow. I do think it's worth, if you have a rainbow, searching throne sites and, maybe a few other sites say a swamp or things like that. But you really probably should have better things to be doing with your Pretender. And that's definitely a problem that I have as a player that, I'm working on. The build can't all be about the scales and the well, I mean, it certainly can, but the more that I play, the more I think that you really should be taking all of these things into account, right? You want scales that work, you want a bless that makes sense, and then you want a Pretender that can actually do, useful things for you, either improving on your national strengths or kind of, filling in the weaknesses. And while certainly our Pretender has paths in, magic that our nation doesn't get and can cast useful spells, we didn't really have a game plan of exactly okay, every turn, what is he going to be doing for us? So anyway, all this to say, you could certainly go with an Imprisoned Rainbow, I think, as EA Ermor, and then rely on your Flamen to try to get your,
standard national paths searched out. I think another way that you could support a weaker Equite Bless and go with a Mage Bless is to maybe go with a Dormant Titan. That way, if somebody does run at you, construction is kind of a path that you want as EA Ermor. If you're being like full greed, research that construction 6 first, get those lanterns right away. You can get some kit for your Titan that comes out at turn 12. And that might be enough to turn things around for you if somebody attacks you early. So yeah, I think that kind of covers the majority of what I want to say. I guess one other big thing is, I was a little reluctant to split a global, but I have to say it ended up working out great. It created a good relationship with that player. I actually think now that, if you get the chance, absolutely split a global with someone. Obviously, it depends on who you split it with. It could go bad. But probably you're going to get an ally for the rest of the game, and, if things go well, you're going to be on good terms with that player, for future games. So even though there were kind of points, I think, at which it was a bit awkward for both Abyssia and myself when we kind of lost wars against our other neighbors, and, we were kind of tied at the hip together, being like, well, what do we do now? Overall, at least for me, it was a really good experience. And so, yeah, that was a part of the game that I'm really happy went well. And then, yeah, the war with Russ, what even to say? I learned a lot of respect for that player. I think they're one of the best players that I've had the privilege of playing against. I think that Russ is kind of a challenging nation to play, just from what I've seen. I haven't really messed around with them too much. The player that at least I fought against actually came in as a sub, so I do have to tip my hat to whoever was originally playing Russ. I think that was a really effective bless. I really liked that bless for skin shifters. I don't really know how viable it is in terms of the scales that they had to take to pay for it, and things like that. But assessing it purely from how much of a hassle killing those skin shifters was, huge success. And then, of course, Niflheim, I think, they took a strong nation. They played a really good game, I think, more or less start to finish, picking good targets. They, won their first war really efficiently. They won some other wars, really efficiently. This is actually the second full house that this player has won. So, also really impressive. As ever, if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to catching you in the next game.